Generally, when it comes to open-world survival horror indie games, especially those that slap on the early access label, it's almost a mathematical guarantee that that game is going to be complete hot garbage. There have been a few notable exceptions, The Forest being one that definitely comes to mind for me, but overall we've seen a pretty consistent stream of survival horror early access dreadfulness. However, upon seeing that The Infected has been greeted with a roughly 90% user approval rating on Steam, I decided to take the plunge in order to try to see what seemed to set this apart from the usual garbage heap. So let's start by taking a look at the game's Steam description. The Infected lore. Oh great, we get lore. This ought to be fun. A virus was a lot more serious than anticipated. A treatment was looking promising. A drug trial seemed to work. Many were getting better and fatality rates were dropping. So basically the exact opposite of what's going on in IRL nowadays in 2021, it seems. But oh my god, something went wrong. Let's be honest, it wouldn't be much of a game if everything didn't go horribly, comedically wrong. Some unexpected side effects began to arise, causing human DNA to mutate into something unknown. We call them vampies. I'm sorry, but I've heard lots of stupid names for zombies. I've seen a ton of zombie films and I've played a ton of zombie games. But for the utter life of me, I don't think I've ever heard of something as hilariously stupid as fucking vampies. Well, this is what the media is telling us, but what is the truth? Okay, first off, aside from that being a hilarious description, none of this lore actually really matters. The media, quote-unquote, is never referenced in the game. The vampies, which are supposed to be a cross between vampires and normal zombies, have really no unique, interesting characteristic that distinguishes them from your typical zombie. No vampire-related perk, they can't fly, they only move around slightly faster than your average zombie. They don't really bite the player, they just kind of flail around vaguely. So I'm not even sure why we're pretending they're not just your run-of-the-mill basic zombies. But anyway, back to the description. What The Infected is about. Several friends head out to a remote part of a forest for a weekend of camping. However, after not returning and no sign of their whereabouts, one of the parents decides to go take a look at their last known location to determine the truth. What does he find out? What he probably found out was that you could quite rapidly deforest a forest. Okay, yes, the Steam description is not all that great, but I'm assuming English is not the developer's main language here, so I'm not going to make fun of them too much aside from just, having fun here. The Infected is an open-world sandbox survival crafting game, kind of like The Forest, and, other games like Green Hell. Build your base and prepare to defend yourself from wildlife and infected vampies. I'm just gonna call them fucking zombies. The Steam page goes on to list a number of in-game features, including character hunger, thirst, body temperature mechanics, base building, hunting, crafting, farming, a day-night cycle, a weather cycle, in-game seasons, etc. So it's going to be primarily those features I plan to critique here today. There are a few other features listed, but they don't play as crucial a role, and they are a bit more time intensive. So I'm going to hold off on discussing those for now. I may come back and do a full review of the game when it exits early access and releases as a full game. Before we get into the individual pros and cons, keep in mind that this is a very new early access game, and it's quite possible that some or even the majority of my criticisms later on may not reflect the state of the game a year from now or so. One of the first things I noticed in-game was that there is quite a bit to do. It doesn't help that many of the controls and mechanics are rather poorly explained. The tutorial, if it can be generously called that, does the bare minimum to educate the player in regards to basic survival mechanics. However, I ended up having to get a lot of help from the game's own community because the tutorial doesn't properly do its functional job of instilling a basic sense of how to play. If you're like me, you'll definitely need a lot of help from the community either in the Steam discussion forums, on the game's official Discord, or just by watching helpful walkthrough guide videos, so just bear that in mind. As of now, when I'm recording this, I put in about 15 hours into the game. I've only now built all the bare essentials. I've got a pretty decent looking 2-floor house, I've got a few forges, some wood sawing tables, some lamps, a fairly extensive wall to protect my newfound home, etc. Basically everything needed for a well-run survival home, well, aside from a steady food supply. I've yet to master the art of preserving food and maintaining enough water to keep me going during the winter. So instead of feeding myself regularly and ensuring I have enough water at all times, I just keep working away until I drop dead, literally, in the game. Kind of your quintessential capitalistic system now that I stop and think about it. Okay, that was rather pessimistic of me, but we'll proceed anyway. The first step to building your first base is gathering resources, and you're going to need quite a lot of them. And to gather those vast majority of resources, you'll need the right assortment of tools. you'll have a fair number of tools to work with, and crafting them isn't exactly difficult, as the recipes for each require commonly found components like plant fiber, rocks, sticks, etc. But figuring out what you need in what order, aka learning what to prioritize, takes a bit of experience. I found that for the most part, you'll get by well enough early on by almost exclusively relying on the axe and the pickaxe. These tools will break over time, but you do get a decent amount of value out of them before they break. With every swing you make, its durability incrementally decreases until the item breaks altogether. However, while your weapons and items will break, they do not seem to degrade in quality nor effectiveness, which is nice. They could be one hit away from breaking, but they'll still be just as effective as they were on their first swing. There's more than enough micromanaging to concern yourself with once you've set up your base. You don't really need more to worry about in that regard, so it's nice we don't have to worry about weapon degradation here. The crafting system is very rough and somewhat lacking. For example, while combining certain identical items will produce specific combinations, if you are looking to build multiples of anything, say axes, arrows, or whatever, you cannot simply multiply the recipe ingredients by 2 on the crafting table in order to expedite the process. You need to put in the exact number of ingredients for one, then exit the window, then open it back up again in order to begin crafting the duplicate of said item. It's not a game-breaking issue by any means, but streamlining this process a bit in order to save the player from wasting time unnecessarily would be a very nice quality of life improvement. So with the resource and crafting discussion out of the way, let's discuss the base building. It's alright, middling to decent overall. There's a very limited selection of preset building options, your typical foundation, walls, roof, etc. One of each for the most part, aside from roofs, which has a bit more variety in terms of options. However, while the building menu may be excessively restrictive, what is there works fine. I was initially concerned that the game would be pretty poorly optimized, especially if I built a somewhat larger than normal base. But I've seen few, if any, real glitches. There is one notable glitch I did notice in the placement of objects like walls, windows, ceilings, etc. Unless you're standing in the exact, and I do mean exact, spot the game wants you to stand, it is incredibly and unnecessarily hard to place the building schematic. This was especially bad in regards to windows. I had to quite literally spam the E key rapidly while moving around to find the exact right spot after like a minute of trying to delicately adjust where I was standing. I shouldn't have to button spam in order to get the game to function properly, but if you're willing to put up with weird bugs like that, the building system is fine. Passable at least. And for an early access game this early into development, I'll take passable. I had a good amount of fun building out my home. I was originally going to go for a somewhat generic 2-floor approach, but I ended up favoring this old-fashioned Western saloon-like design structure. I would love it if I could go a bit farther with it, like maybe if I could set up an indoor fireplace, that way my character isn't freezing out in the cold, and maybe even be able to cook indoors, as opposed to only being able to use the specifically designated campfire outside. Likewise, I find it odd that I can build a table and chairs, but can't sit in my chair for fun. Or alternatively to very slowly alleviate, or at the least mitigate, my character's tiredness. Also, and this is a bigger concern, but why are the lighting options so limited? Later in game you do unlock electricity, which does open up quite a few individual items that offer a fair amount of additional utility, but until then, for the first few hours, you better get used to being in nearly complete darkness at all times in your buildings, which is not very desirable as the day-night cycles are fairly long. I haven't exactly timed it, but if I had to give you a rough estimate, I think it would be fair to say that both the day and night tend to last about half an hour or so apiece, which is fairly long compared to most survival games, as Minecraft's night cycle lasts around 7 minutes, and for the Forest, its night cycle lasts around 20 minutes. So not having proper lighting for your first few hours is a bit of a problem. Even if the quality of the lighting isn't great, even if it's a lot more limited than their later game counterparts, anything would be preferable to nothing. I should note, you do have the small lamp that you can build early in game, but unless you're building like 12 of them or 13 of them, it's not going to do a whole lot. This is probably one of the things you'll notice in my gameplay, but at one point I completely deforested a nearly football field-sized area around my house in my attempts to build said house. Like other survival games, there is seemingly an automated process in place allowing the forest to gradually regrow over time, which is nice as it'll help prevent you from basically turning this beautiful landscape into a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Speaking of apocalyptic, let's talk about the zombies, and I'm not calling them by their in-game name. There's really nothing in-game right now that separates them from any other generic Unity asset zombie. Hopefully that'll change. The zombies in the game tend to be pretty passive. One hit will make them instantly run away like a little bitch, forcing you to engage in a Tom and Jerry-like chase, or alternatively just let them run out of sight. Also, and this is a bit nitpicky, but the zombie scream sound effect you hear every time the zombies are anywhere in your general vicinity is not all that great. It sounds like a rather low quality placeholder, something that likewise feels like it was just grabbed off the Unity Asset Store or a similar marketplace. The more frequently you hear it, the more you too will probably see, or rather hear what I mean here. One of the main reasons I didn't really like the combat in the game, aside from the laughably bad zombie AI, is how weapons are implemented here. The hit detection on all the weapons is very imprecise and unreliable. Unless your cursor is exactly centered in the middle of the tree you're chopping down, or alternatively right in the middle of your enemy's chest, you're simply going to miss every single shot and just hit empty air instead. As a result, it appears the only way to eliminate zombies face to face is just stand completely still and hit them, and hope that they die before you die. And that shouldn't be the case. While none of us want massive ranged hitboxes for melee weapons, melee combat should not feel frustrating and tedious. It should be an intense and potentially rewarding experience, which right now it certainly is not. However, that said, it's not only the enemy zombies you need to defend yourself and your home from, but also the element as well. In addition to the zombie AI, you do have a limited but still decent variety of animals that you can hunt in order to collect meat and other resources. The animals are irritatingly loud. If a single hog or a sheep is anywhere within 100 yards of you, believe me, you'll hear it coming easily long before you see it. Hogs, along with wolves, can be hostile in nature. Wolves are, from what I've seen, inherently hostile, whereas hogs tend to be neutral. If you don't bother them, they won't bother you. But if you attack them, then may God have mercy on your soul. Now, going back to the Early Access Steam store page's description. It does have a bit about regulating your body heat, but doing so isn't exactly easy. The game doesn't do enough to clarify what can be combined with what. You're telling me with the dozen or so animals I've skewered with my spear and proceeded to skin, that I somehow can't use their hides to make myself some basic clothing? I mean, I know nothing I make by hand is going to have that professional, well-crafted look to it. I know it's probably going to look like the world's ugliest dress, but my character isn't exactly prepping for a job interview. He's stuck on an abandoned island with only vampire zombies for company. I don't think anyone's going to judge you for using animal skin in your clothes. Twitter isn't around to see it. The game introduces a lot of systems that are poorly explained and tend to only inconsistently deliver meaningful depth. I wish that when it launched, it cut back initially on some of its initial promises, and instead redoubled work on only a handful of them, elaborating on them, rather than presenting such a confusing scrambled mess of concepts that are each paper thin in terms of care and detail. It's worth noting on a technical level, the game is very prone to soft crashes, and sporadically even hard crashes. For those unclear about the fine distinction of soft crashes where your game freezes up but the app doesn't entirely crash to desktop, and instead attempts to recover, ultimately resulting in the dreaded white screen of doom. A hard crash is where the program just immediately terminates itself without warning, bringing you back to your normal desktop. You can sometimes have a soft crash turn into a hard crash, but that's lingo we can discuss another day. This game tends to crash the most during three specific instances. Either A, you are starting a new game, or alternatively loading an existing save file, B, when you quit that session and go back to the main menu, or C, when you hit the quit button on the main menu. I've yet to notice any soft or hard crash during my extensive time spent in-game. Overall, do I recommend it? I'm kind of torn about that. I did have a fair amount of fun playing. I don't generally play a single game for almost 5 hours in one go, and for a grand total of almost 15 hours before even starting to write out my review, so clearly there is something here. But even by the fairly low standards of early access games, I do think the developer rushed it out a bit too early. It's quite likely that all these issues can be fixed, but while the current game is functional, I just can't get fully on board with calling it fun. It is kind of fun if you disable the zombies and treat the game as a purely survival experience, but as a result, without the zombies, it gets boring. But with the zombies on, the nightly grind does also get annoying, so kind of a lose-lose either way, I suppose. The absence of co-op functionality is strongly felt here. There's a lot of instances where I feel that having another player or two might make the gameplay flow a bit tighter and more efficient, such as, gathering resources or hunting food, etc. While I don't think adding co-op is or should be the biggest priority right now, when the zombie AI is so stupidly broke and in need of repairs, I hope the developer does consider eventually adding in a multiplayer component. I would love to be able to locally host a game with my friends and have, some fun there. If a year from now the building system gets a bit more depth, if the zombie AI gets some kind of massive overhaul, if the UI gets completely replaced by something that is actually easy to work with, as opposed to being a complete visual mess, I might come back to it and probably give it a lot more credit, but for now I'm willing to sit back and wait for a bit before taking another look at this game. The Infected is available on Steam for $13.99 USD or your region equivalent. Support it if you want to. I don't think it's a waste of money. In fact, I'm rather hopeful for what the game may eventually become, if it chooses to improve on many of the areas I've outlined. But until then, I would say buyer beware. I got quite a few more hours worth of value out of it than I had initially anticipated. And any time a game incentivizes me to keep playing longer than strictly necessary, I count as a net positive. The developer seems honest enough, and the community, from what I've seen, seems pretty decent, so I'm inclined to believe the developer is sincere about making this game the best it can be. But as with any in-progress game, it's a gamble you're going to have to take for yourself. These are just my opinions. Take them as you will. On a final note, a huge thanks to Deft Spider for answering some of my questions and providing me a lot of good starting information. He's got a great small channel that he has a fantastic walkthrough series explaining everything you need to know in order to learn how to survive, craft, and build. I highly recommend giving his channel a look if you're interested in watching a proper walkthrough of the game. And if you do check him out, be sure to give his video a like, and if you want, tell me if you did so in the comments down below. I'd love to support other creators, and he's a good one. Now, on that note, that's where I think I'm going to wrap it up for today. If you found this video informative, by all means, feel free to like the video and tell me what you think of this game based on what you've seen in the gameplay or from your own impressions from playing it yourself. If you played it, I'd love to hear what your opinion is. Believe me, my opinion is not the only one in the universe, and I'm well aware of that. So yeah, you see that little comment section, so light it up, tell me what you think. If you want to support what I do here on the channel, consider subscribing, because that always helps, and clicking the bell so you can be among the first to know when a new video goes live. Lately, my upload schedule has been somewhat erratic. I've been focusing really hard on getting a lot of videos in advance going, as I'm going back to school soon, so eventually I'm hoping to get back on a consistent upload schedule. But even with that said, you can still look forward to at least one video a week, and potentially more than one in the near future. This is WarriorDan signing out. Stay awesome, everybody, stay safe, and peace out.